The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek as Lydia Clarke sat slumped on a wooden bench outside Jennings' General Store, her tear-stained face buried in trembling hands. The letter crumpled in her lap contained news that had shattered her world. The family ranch she'd traveled west to claim had been lost to back taxes before she'd even arrived. "You look like you could use company," a deep voice drawled above her. Lydia startled, hastily wiping her eyes with her sleeve as she looked up to see a tall man silhouetted against the fading light. The stranger wore a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes, a dusty duster, and had the unmistakable bearing of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she replied stiffly, attempting to maintain some dignity despite her obviously distraught state. The cowboy shifted his weight, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, but not without kindness in his blue eyes. "Begging your pardon, madam, but folks who are quite all right don't usually sit crying outside stores at sunset in a town they don't belong to." His observation, though forward, wasn't wrong. Lydia had arrived in Silver Creek, Colorado, just that morning after a grueling journey from Boston. The year was 1878, and at 22 years of age, she'd abandoned everything familiar to claim her late uncle's ranch only to discover it was now in the hands of the bank. "I don't see how that's any of your business, mister," she replied, attempting to gather her composure. "Zachary Holcomb," he answered, tipping his hat. "Most folks call me Zach." Lydia smoothed her rumpled traveling dress. "Miss Lydia Clarke." "And I assure you, Mr. Holcomb, I'm perfectly capable of managing my own troubles." A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Never suggested otherwise, Miss Clarke. But night's coming on fast, and Silver Creek ain't the safest place for a lady alone after dark." He gestured toward the saloon down the street, where boisterous voices were already spilling into the evening air. "You got someplace to stay?" The question brought fresh tears to her eyes, which she fought desperately to contain. Her meager savings had been spent on the journey west, with the expectation she'd have her uncle's ranch awaiting her. "I'll find accommodations," she insisted, though she had no idea where. Zach's gaze softened. "Mrs. Peterson runs a respectable boarding house 2 streets over. Clean rooms, fair prices." He paused. "And she might be willing to let you work off the cost if you're short on funds." Lydia stiffened, pride wrestling with desperation. "I don't recall mentioning my financial situation, Mr. Holcomb." "You didn't have to," he replied gently. "That letter you're clutching tells quite a story, and so does the fact you've been sitting here for near 2 hours with nowhere to go." Had it been that long? Lydia glanced around, noticing the street had emptied as businesses closed for the evening. Only the saloon seemed to be gaining patrons. "I suppose I should be on my way then," she said, rising unsteadily to her feet. The long journey and the shock of her circumstances had left her lightheaded. Zach reached out to steady her when she swayed slightly. "Allow me to escort you to the boarding house." No strings attached, just trying to be neighborly. Something in his earnest expression made Lydia relent. "Very well, Mr. Holcomb. I would appreciate that kindness." As they walked the darkening streets, Lydia found herself studying her unexpected companion. He wasn't overly tall, perhaps 5 feet 10 inches, but he moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His clothes were worn but clean, and despite his rugged appearance, there was something inherently trustworthy about him. "What brings you to Silver Creek, Miss Clarke?" "If you don't mind my asking," he inquired as they turned onto a quieter street lined with modest homes. Lydia hesitated, then decided there was little harm in sharing her situation. "My uncle, Thomas Clarke, owned a small ranch outside of town. When he passed last winter, he left it to me. I received the deed in March and sold everything I owned back east to make the journey." Her voice caught, only to discover the property was seized for unpaid taxes 3 weeks ago. Zach's brow furrowed. "The old Clarke place? Out by Cottonwood Creek. You know it?" Lydia asked, surprised. "Every ranch within 50 miles, he confirmed with a nod. "Decent land, good water rights. Shame about the taxes. The county's been ruthless about collections since the new assessor took office." They arrived at a neat 2-story house with a small sign reading Peterson Boarding House hanging beside the door. A warm light glowed from the windows. "Here we are," Zach said, climbing the 3 steps to the porch and knocking firmly on the door. Moments later, A plump woman in her 50s opened it, her questioning expression softening when she saw Zach. "Evening, Mrs. Peterson," he greeted. "Got a lady here in need of lodging. Miss Lydia Clarke, just arrived from back east." Mrs. Peterson's shrewd eyes assessed Lydia. "Come in, dear. You look dead on your feet." Lydia entered gratefully, the warmth of the house a welcome respite from the evening chill. "Miss Clarke had some misfortune regarding her uncle's property," Zach explained. "I mentioned you might have work she could do in exchange for room and board until she gets settled." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened further. "Thomas Clarke's niece, are you? I was sorry to hear of his passing. He was a good man." She gestured toward a sitting room. "I could use help with the cooking and cleaning. Nothing too strenuous, but it would cover a small room and meals." Relief flooded through Lydia. "That would be most appreciated, Mrs. Peterson. I'm no stranger to hard work." "Well then, that's settled," Zach said, remaining by the door. "I'll leave you ladies to get acquainted." Lydia turned to him, suddenly realizing she hadn't properly thanked him. "Mr. Holcomb, I'm grateful for your assistance this evening." He tipped his hat again, a small smile playing at his lips. "Just being neighborly, Miss Clarke. Welcome to Silver Creek." With that, he stepped back into the night, the door closing softly behind him. Mrs. Peterson showed Lydia to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. There's hot water in the kitchen if you want to wash up. Breakfast is at 6 sharp." Left alone, Lydia sank onto the narrow bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to flow freely. Everything she'd planned had fallen apart in a single day. Yet as she cried, she reminded herself that Clarke women didn't surrender to misfortune. Her mother had raised her to be resilient after her father died in the war between the states. "I'll find a way," she whispered to herself, determination rising through her exhaustion. This isn't the end. Morning came too quickly, the pale dawn light filtering through thin curtains as a bell rang downstairs. Lydia dressed hurriedly in her second-best dress, pinning her chestnut hair into a simple bun before making her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson was already cooking, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the air. "Good morning, dear. Hope you slept well. There's coffee on the stove, and if you'll set the table for 8, we can get breakfast going." Lydia quickly found plates and utensils, arranging them neatly on the long dining table. As she worked, other boarders began to appear: 2 elderly sisters, a young schoolteacher, a clerk from the mercantile, and a middle-aged couple who worked at the Silver Assay office. They greeted Lydia with curious but friendly interest, asking polite questions about her journey west. No one pried about her circumstances, for which she was grateful. After breakfast, Mrs. Peterson showed Lydia her duties, helping prepare meals, cleaning rooms, and doing laundry. The work was hard but straightforward, and Lydia threw herself into it with determination, grateful for the distraction from her troubles. 3 days passed in this routine, with Lydia working from dawn until dusk. On the 4th morning, as she hung laundry in the backyard, a familiar voice called her name. "Miss Clarke." She turned to see Zachary Holcomb standing by the garden gate, hat in hand. He looked different in daylight, younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 30. His hair was the color of wheat, and his eyes were a striking blue against his tanned skin. "Mr. Holcomb," she acknowledged, trying not to show her surprise. "What brings you here?" He shifted slightly, betraying a hint of nervousness she hadn't observed before. "I've been thinking about your situation. With your uncle's ranch, I mean." Lydia's hands stilled on the damp sheet she was hanging. "Oh, there might be a way for you to contest the tax seizure," he said. "If your uncle's death and the property transfer weren't properly recorded with the county, the tax assessment might be invalid." Hope flickered briefly before Lydia tamped it down. "That's kind of you to suggest, but I've already visited the county clerk's office. The seizure was legal, if not entirely just." Zach nodded, accepting her assessment. "Then I have another proposition for you." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I own a small ranch about 10 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, but it's paid for. I'm looking to expand into cattle breeding, but I need help." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "And what does this have to do with me, Mr. Holcomb?" "I need a housekeeper," he stated plainly. "Someone to cook, clean, and help with the books. The pay would be better than what you're making here, and you'd have your own cabin on the property." Suspicion immediately clouded Lydia's thoughts. A single woman working for a single man on an isolated ranch. Her reputation would be ruined. As if reading her mind, Zach quickly added, "My sister Abigail lives with me. She's 16 and could use a woman's influence. It would be completely proper." Lydia considered the offer. It seemed too convenient, too fortuitous. "Why me? You hardly know me. Mrs. Peterson says you work hard and don't complain. You're educated enough to help with accounts." And he added with a hint of a smile, "Abigail said she'd leave if I didn't find someone to teach her how to be a proper lady soon." Despite herself, Lydia laughed. "And you think I'm proper enough for that task? You're from Boston. That's proper enough for Silver Creek." It was a tempting offer: better pay, more independence, and a chance to learn about ranching firsthand. If she ever hoped to have her own place someday, this experience would be invaluable. "I would need references," she said cautiously. Zach nodded. "Of course. Sheriff Taylor knows me well. So does Reverend Marshall. Ask around town about Zach Holcomb. I've been here 8 years. And your sister? She's agreeable to this arrangement." "It was her idea," he admitted. "After I mentioned meeting you." Lydia turned back to the laundry, needing a moment to think. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Holcomb. But I'll need to speak with your references and meet your sister before making any decisions." "Fair enough," he agreed readily. "Abigail and I will be in town on Saturday for supplies. Perhaps you could join us for lunch at the hotel?" "That would be acceptable," Lydia replied, trying to maintain a businesslike tone despite the flutter of interest she felt. Zach settled his hat back on his head. "Until Saturday then, Miss Clarke." As he walked away, Lydia found herself watching him longer than was strictly proper. There was something compelling about Zachary Holcomb, a quiet confidence mixed with genuine kindness that she found refreshing after the polished but often insincere gentleman of Boston society. That evening, Lydia discreetly inquired about Zach among the other boarders. The responses were universally positive. "Holcomb, salt of the earth," said Mr. Jenkins, the elderly banker who took his evening meals at the boarding house. "Came here with nothing but his horse and saddle. Worked the silver mines until he saved enough to buy that little spread of his. Pays his debts on time, stands by his word. And handsome as they come," added Miss Phillips, the younger of the two elderly sisters, with a knowing smile. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he's been too busy building his ranch to notice." "His sister is a sweet girl," Mrs. Peterson contributed. "Wild as a March hare, but good-hearted. Their parents died in a typhoid outbreak in Kansas when Abigail was just 8. Zach has raised her since then." The information eased Lydia's concerns somewhat, but she remained cautious. Her situation was precarious enough without making hasty decisions. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Lydia wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim that she'd carefully pressed the night before. At precisely noon, she walked to the Silver Creek Hotel, a 2-story building that served as the finest establishment in the small town. Zach was waiting on the porch, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his usual duster and hat absent. Beside him stood a tall, gangly girl with the same wheat-colored hair, though hers hung in a long braid down her back. "Miss Clarke," Zach greeted, his usual reserved smile warming his features. "May I present my sister, Abigail Holcomb?" The girl stepped forward, attempting a clumsy curtsy that nearly sent her sprawling. "Miss Clarke, I'm so pleased to meet you. Zach has talked of nothing else all week." "Abby," Zach muttered, a flush creeping up his neck. Lydia couldn't help but smile at the girl's enthusiasm and her brother's obvious embarrassment. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Holcomb." "Oh, please call me Abby." "Everyone does. And may I call you Lydia?" "If we're to live together, it seems silly to be so formal." "Abby, we don't even know if Miss Clarke is accepting our offer," Zach reminded her gently. The girl's face fell. "But she must. Zach, tell her about the cabin. It's ever so nice since you fixed the roof and added the new porch." Lydia laughed, finding Abby's directness refreshing. "Perhaps we could discuss it over lunch?" The meal was pleasant, with Abby chattering about the ranch, her horses, and how desperately she needed someone to teach her proper things before she became completely uncivilized. "Zach tries," she confided, "but he knows nothing about ladies' matters. Last Christmas, he bought me a dress 2 sizes too large because he was too embarrassed to ask about my measurements." Zach, to his credit, endured his sister's stories with good-natured patience. As they ate, Lydia observed the obvious affection between the siblings, noting how Zach gently corrected Abby's table manners without humiliating her. After the meal, Zach excused himself to speak with the feed store owner, leaving Lydia and Abby to become better acquainted. "He's a good brother," Abby said once they were alone. "The best. But he works too hard and never thinks of himself." "That's admirable," Lydia replied. Abby leaned forward conspirationally. "He needs a wife, but he's too stubborn to court anyone properly. Says the ranch comes first." She sighed dramatically. "I keep telling him, what good is a successful ranch if you've got no one to share it with?" Lydia felt her cheeks warm. "I believe your brother is offering me employment, Abby, not courtship." The girl's eyes twinkled mischievously. "For now, perhaps. But I've never seen him polish his boots for a business meeting before." Before Lydia could respond to this startling information, Zach returned, and the conversation shifted to more practical matters: her duties, compensation, and living arrangements. "The cabin is small," he explained, "but it's got a proper bedroom, a sitting area with a fireplace, and a small kitchen. It's about 100 yards from the main house, so you'll have privacy." "And what exactly would my responsibilities be?" Lydia asked. "Cooking, cleaning, helping with the accounts," he listed. "Teaching Abby whatever you think she ought to know about being a proper young lady. Occasionally helping with light ranch work if you're willing." The terms were more than fair: room and board plus a monthly salary that exceeded what she might make working in town. Still, Lydia hesitated. "Could I see the ranch before making my decision?" Zach nodded. "Of course. I can bring the wagon by tomorrow after church, if that suits you." They agreed on the arrangement, and after bidding Abby goodbye, Zach walked Lydia back to the boarding house. "Your sister is delightful," Lydia remarked as they strolled. "She likes you," Zach replied. "She's not usually so comfortable with strangers." "And do you share her opinion, Mr. Holcomb?" Lydia asked, surprising herself with her boldness. He glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "I believe I made that clear by offering you employment, Miss Clarke." "Yes, but is it solely because you need a housekeeper? Or is there another reason?" They reached the boarding house steps, and Zach paused, considering his words carefully. "I believe in Providence, Miss Clarke. Sometimes people come into our lives exactly when they're needed." He tipped his hat. "I'll call for you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. As Lydia watched him walk away, she wondered if Providence had indeed brought her to Silver Creek for a purpose she hadn't yet discerned. The following day, after church services, Lydia changed into a more practical dress and waited on the boarding house porch. Precisely at 1, Zach arrived with a wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses. "Ready to see your potential new home?" he asked, helping her up to the seat beside him. The journey took just over an hour, the wagon following a well-maintained road that eventually branched onto a narrower track. As they crested a small hill, the Holcomb Ranch came into view: a modest but well-built house, several outbuildings, corrals holding horses, and beyond them, grassland stretching toward distant mountains. "It's not much," Zach said, a note of pride underlying his humble words, "but it's good land with reliable water." "How many acres?" Lydia asked, impressed despite herself by the neat, well-maintained property. 640. A full section." He pointed toward a small cabin set a short distance from the main house. "That would be your place. I rebuilt it last summer." As they drew closer, Lydia could see flower boxes under the cabin's windows and a small vegetable garden to one side. It looked inviting, almost like a home rather than servants' quarters. Abby came running out as they pulled up to the main house. "You came. Does that mean you're staying?" "She's here to look things over before deciding," Zach reminded his sister gently. The tour was thorough. The main house first, a sturdy 2-story structure with a large kitchen, comfortable sitting room, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. Then the barn, corrals, smokehouse, and finally, Lydia's potential cabin. It was simple but charming, with whitewashed walls, polished wood floors, and windows that caught the afternoon light. The bedroom held a well-made bed with a colorful quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand. The main room featured a stone fireplace, 2 comfortable chairs, a small dining table, and bookshelves holding a surprising number of volumes. "You have quite a library," Lydia remarked, scanning the titles. "Those were our mother's," Abby explained. "Zach makes sure we add to it whenever possible." "Do you like to read, Lydia?" "Very much. It was my favorite pastime in Boston." Zach, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. You're welcome to borrow any books you wish, regardless of whether you take the position. His thoughtfulness touched Lydia. Every detail of the cabin showed consideration for comfort and practicality. Someone had even placed a small vase of wildflowers on the table. I picked those this morning, Abby admitted. I wanted it to look nice in case you came. After the tour, they returned to the main house where Abby insisted on serving coffee and freshly baked bread with preserves. I made it myself, she announced proudly, though the slightly misshapen loaf suggested she was still mastering the skill. It's delicious, Lydia assured her after taking a bite of the dense but flavorful bread. As the afternoon lengthened into early evening, Lydia found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of living and working at the Holcomb Ranch. The siblings' easy companionship, the well-ordered property, and the beautiful surroundings all appealed to her practical nature. When Zach offered to show her the spring-fed creek that bordered the property, she readily agreed. They walked in comfortable silence, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grassland. "What do you think?" he finally asked as they stood watching the clear water bubble over smooth stones. "It's lovely," Lydia answered honestly. "You've built something remarkable here, Mr. Holcomb." "Zach," he corrected gently. "If you decide to stay, I think we can dispense with formalities." She nodded, testing the familiarity. "Zach, and yes, I believe I would like to accept your offer." Relief washed over his features. "You won't regret it. When can you start?" "I should give Mrs. Peterson a week's notice," Lydia replied. "Would next Monday be acceptable?" "More than acceptable." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Lydia. This means a great deal to Abby. And to me." Something in his tone made Lydia glance up at him, catching an expression in his eyes that sent an unexpected warmth through her. For a moment, she wondered if Abby's matchmaking aspirations weren't entirely unfounded. The ride back to town was companionable, with Lydia asking practical questions about the ranch operations and Zach answering with obvious knowledge and passion for his work. "The cattle business is changing," he explained. "It's not enough to simply run herds anymore. Quality breeding is the future, and that's where I aim to focus." "It sounds like you have a clear vision," Lydia remarked. "A man needs something to work toward," he replied. "A purpose larger than himself." When they reached the boarding house, Zach helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, they stood closer than propriety strictly allowed, and Lydia found herself noticing the small details of his face, a tiny scar near his right eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his beard was slightly darker than his hair. "I'll come for you next Monday," he said, stepping back. "Around 10, if that suits you?" Lydia nodded, suddenly finding words difficult. "That would be fine. Good night, Mr. Zach." "Good night, Lydia." He tipped his hat and climbed back into the wagon, but remained watching until she was safely inside the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson was understanding about Lydia's decision. "Zach Holcomb is one of the good ones," she said approvingly. "You'll be safe there, and that's saying something in these parts." The week passed quickly as Lydia prepared for her new position. She purchased a few necessities with her boarding house earnings, some fabric for new aprons, a sturdy pair of boots more suitable for ranch life, and a journal to record her experiences. On Monday morning, she was ready with her single trunk packed when Zach arrived. He looked different, somehow more polished than usual, his duster brushed clean, his beard neatly trimmed. "Ready for your new adventure?" he asked, loading her trunk into the wagon. The journey to the ranch seemed shorter this time, filled with comfortable conversation. Lydia found herself relaxing in Zach's company, his steady presence a reassuring contrast to the uncertainty that had marked her arrival in Colorado. Abby was waiting at the gate when they arrived, practically bouncing with excitement. "You're here at last. I've been counting the days. Come see what I've done to your cabin." The girl had been busy. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, the floors had been scrubbed to a shine, and wildflowers brightened every room. "Zach said I wasn't to overdo it," Abby confided, "but I wanted you to feel welcome." "It's perfect," Lydia assured her, touched by the thoughtful gestures. That evening, they dined together in the main house. The meal simple but delicious: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread that Abby had made under Zach's supervision. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the kitchen and where everything is kept," Zach explained. "For tonight, I thought you might like to rest and settle in." As Lydia walked back to her cabin in the gathering dusk, A profound sense of peace settled over her. The disappointment of losing her uncle's ranch was still there, but it had been replaced by something unexpected: hope for a new beginning. The first week at the Holcomb Ranch established a comfortable routine. Lydia rose early to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the main house, afternoons teaching Abby various ladle-like skills, and evenings keeping the ranch accounts in order. Zach was often busy with the physical demands of ranch work, but he made time each evening to review the books with Lydia, their heads bent close together over columns of figures by lamplight. "You have a gift for this," he remarked on the fourth evening, impressed by her efficient reorganization of his chaotic bookkeeping system. "My father was an accountant," she explained. "He taught me from the time I was small. He would be proud of you," Zach said softly. Lydia looked up, surprised by the personal observation. "I hope so." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken connection forming between them that went beyond employer and employee. As weeks turned into months, Lydia found herself increasingly invested in the ranch's success. She suggested improvements to the garden, planted herbs for cooking, and even learned to milk the 2 dairy cows Zach kept for household use. Abby blossomed under Lydia's guidance, her natural exuberance tempered by growing poise. The girl confided her dreams of attending a proper school someday, perhaps even teaching herself. "Zach says I can go to Denver next year if I keep up with my studies," she revealed one afternoon as Lydia taught her to embroider. "But I'm worried about leaving him alone." "Your brother is quite capable," Lydia assured her, though the thought of the ranch without Abby's vibrant presence was oddly disheartening. "He needs someone," Abby insisted. "Someone special." Lydia carefully avoided responding to this obvious hint. One evening in late summer, as Lydia sat on her cabin porch watching the sunset, Zach appeared with a small package in hand. "Evening," he greeted, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "May I join you?" She gestured to the second chair. "Of course." He settled beside her, the package balanced on his knee. "I was in town today. Picked up something I thought you might like." Lydia accepted the parcel, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a leather-bound book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "I noticed you didn't have this one," he explained. "The bookseller said it was just published last year." The thoughtfulness of the gift left Lydia momentarily speechless. That he had noticed which books she already owned, had specifically sought out something she might enjoy, it spoke volumes about the kind of man Zachary Holcomb was. "Thank you," she finally managed. "This is very thoughtful." He smiled, relief evident in his expression. "I'm glad you like it. I'm not much for poetry myself, but I remember you saying she was your favorite." They sat in companionable silence as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. When the first stars appeared, Zach spoke again, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. "Having you here these past months, it's made a difference. To the ranch. To Abby." He paused. "To me." Lydia's heart quickened at his words. "I've been happy here," she admitted. "Happier than I expected to be after losing my uncle's property." "Sometimes what we think we want isn't what we need," Zach observed. With obvious reluctance, he stood. "I should let you rest. Good night, Lydia." "Good night, Zach." As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch prepared for winter. Hay was cut and stored, firewood stacked, preserves put up from the garden harvest. Lydia threw herself into these preparations with enthusiasm, learning new skills and taking pride in contributing to the ranch's sustainability. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that transformed the landscape overnight. Lydia woke to find Abby outside her cabin, practically bursting with excitement. "Come see. Everything's white and beautiful." Wrapping herself in a warm shawl, Lydia stepped out into a world transformed. The ranch buildings wore crowns of white, the distant mountains gleamed in the morning sun, and their breath fogged in the crisp air. Zach emerged from the barn, carrying a saddle. He paused when he saw them, his face breaking into a rare, full smile. First snow. Always something special about it. Later that day, as Lydia kneaded bread dough in the kitchen, she heard the unmistakable sound of laughter outside. Looking through the window, she saw Zach and Abby engaged in a spirited snowball fight, their usual roles temporarily abandoned as they played like children. Without thinking, Lydia wiped her hands and hurried outside, only to be greeted by a snowball that narrowly missed her head. Sorry, Abby called, giggling. That was meant for Zach. Before Lydia could respond, Zach scooped up more snow. Better defend yourself, Miss Clarke. No quarter given in a Holcomb snow battle. The dignified housekeeper disappeared as Lydia bent to form her own ammunition, laughing as she hadn't since childhood. Soon all three were breathless and damp, cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. Truce, Zach finally called, holding up his hands in surrender. You ladies are too formidable a team. They trooped inside for hot chocolate, the usual boundaries between them temporarily dissolved by shared play. As Lydia stirred the warming milk, she caught Zach watching her with an expression that made her cheeks warm in a way that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. That evening, after Abby had gone to bed, Zach lingered in the kitchen as Lydia finished tidying up. I don't think I've heard you laugh like that before, he observed, leaning against the doorframe. Lydia smiled, remembering the afternoon's fun. It's been a long time since I played in the snow. You should laugh more often. It suits you. The simple compliment sent warmth spreading through her chest. Thank you for including me today. It was freeing. Zach stepped further into the kitchen, suddenly serious. Lydia, I've been meaning to ask you something. Her heart skipped, anticipation and uncertainty mingling. Yes. Before he could continue, a pounding at the front door interrupted them. Zach frowned, instantly alert. Stay here, he instructed, moving quickly toward the sound. Lydia heard men's voices. Zach's measured tones contrasted with a stranger's urgent ones. Minutes later, Zach returned to the kitchen, his expression grim. That was Jim Farley from the neighboring ranch. There's a band of rustlers working the area. They hit the Peterson place last night, and the Taylors the night before. Is everyone all right? Lydia asked, concern replacing her earlier anticipation. No one hurt, but they've lost cattle and horses. Jim's riding to alert all the ranches. Zach ran a hand through his hair, his earlier relaxed demeanor gone. I need to check the stock, reinforce the barn. What can I do? Lydia asked immediately. His expression softened briefly. Make sure the rifle above the fireplace is loaded. There's ammunition in the drawer of the side table. If anyone approaches that isn't me or someone you recognize, get Abby and yourself into the root cellar behind the kitchen. The seriousness of his instructions sent a chill through Lydia. Be careful, she urged as he pulled on his coat. Always am. He hesitated, then added, what I wanted to ask will have to wait. But we'll talk soon. For the next 3 nights, Zach slept in the barn, guarding the livestock. Lydia kept the rifle close and checked on Abby frequently, though she didn't fully explain the situation to avoid frightening the girl. On the 4th morning, Lydia woke to the sound of horses in the yard. Looking out her window, she saw Zach talking with several men, including Sheriff Taylor from town. Dressing quickly, she hurried to the main house to prepare coffee and food for the visitors. As she worked, she overheard fragments of conversation from the porch. Caught them trying to cross the Millerson property. 5 men, including the Dobbs brothers, already had 20 head of stolen cattle. When the men had departed, Zach came to the kitchen, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. The rustlers have been captured, he explained, accepting the cup of coffee Lydia offered. Sheriff and his posse tracked them down this morning. Relief flooded through her. Thank God. Are you all right? You look ready to drop. Just tired. Haven't slept much these past few days. Sit, she instructed, pulling out a chair. I'll make you something to eat, and then you're going to rest. Too weary to argue, Zach obeyed, watching through heavy-lidded eyes as Lydia efficiently prepared a hearty breakfast. As she set the plate before him, their fingers brushed momentarily, sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through her. Thank you, he said softly. For everything. For keeping Abby safe, for managing things while I was focused on the livestock. It's what I'm here for, Lydia replied, though they both knew her role had evolved beyond simple employment. After eating, Zach reluctantly allowed himself to be shooed upstairs to rest. Lydia informed Abby that her brother needed sleep and enlisted her help with quiet indoor tasks for the day. By evening, a sense of normalcy had returned to the ranch. Abby had gone to bed early, tired from helping Lydia prepare food for the coming week. Lydia was just banking the fire in the main room when Zach appeared, looking refreshed after his long sleep. Better? She asked, straightening from the hearth. Much. He moved to stand beside her, both of them watching the glowing embers. Lydia, about what I wanted to ask you. She turned to face him, pulse quickening at his serious tone. Yes. Zach took a deep breath. You've been here almost 6 months now. You've transformed this house, helped Abby become a young lady I'm proud of, made the ranch more profitable with your accounting skills. I've enjoyed the work, she said simply. It's more than work, though, isn't it? He stepped closer. At least, it has become more for me. Lydia's breath caught as he gently took her hands in his. I find myself watching for you each morning, looking forward to our evenings reviewing the accounts, missing you when you return to your cabin each night. His voice was low, sincere. I never expected to feel this way again after my parents died. I closed myself off, focused solely on providing for Abby and building the ranch. Zach, Lydia whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I know this may seem sudden, though God knows I've been thinking about it for months. He squeezed her hands gently. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Just for you to consider whether you might see a future here not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Lydia's mind whirled with emotion, surprise, joy, uncertainty. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. You don't need to say anything right now, Zach assured her. Take time to think. To be sure, this ranch, this life, it's not easy. It's not Boston. I wouldn't want you to agree only to regret it later. Lydia found her voice. When I came west, I thought my uncle's ranch was all I wanted. When I lost that chance, I felt as though my dreams had shattered. She looked up at him, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. But being here, working alongside you and Abby, it's become more than employment. It feels like belonging. Zach's expression softened. Is that a yes? It's an, I need to be certain, she replied honestly. For both our sakes, this is too important to rush. Though disappointment flickered briefly across his features, Zach nodded. I understand. Take all the time you need. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Lydia. As she walked back to her cabin that night, Lydia's mind was a tumult of thoughts and emotions. Marriage to Zach would mean permanently embracing this life, this place. It would mean becoming Abby's sister rather than her teacher. It would mean surrendering her dream of someday having her own property. Yet as she considered these changes, Lydia realized they didn't feel like sacrifices. Somewhere in the past months, her dreams had shifted, expanded to include not just land and independence, but also the warmth of family and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting with someone she respected and admired. The next morning, Lydia rose early and walked to the creek, needing space to think clearly. The water flowed steadily over smooth stones, unchanging, yet always moving forward much like life itself, she mused. Penny for your thoughts. She turned to find Abby approaching, her young face unusually serious. Just enjoying the morning, Lydia replied with a smile. Abby sat beside her on a large rock. Zach asked you to marry him, didn't he? Startled, Lydia looked at the girl. How did you know? He told me he was going to. Wanted to make sure I was amenable to the arrangement, as he put it. Abby grinned. As if I haven't been hoping for this since the day he brought you home. And you would be truly happy about it? It would change things between us. Abby shrugged. Things change anyway. I'll be going to school in Denver next year. The ranch needs a woman's touch, a real one, not just a housekeeper. She picked up a pebble, tossing it into the water. And Zach needs someone who sees him for who he really is. You do that. The simple observation from one so young struck Lydia powerfully. Did she see Zach clearly? She believed she did. His strength and his vulnerabilities, his dedication and his loneliness, his capability and his need for companionship. He loves you, you know. Abby continued matter-of-factly. He's different when you're around. Happier. More like he was before our parents died. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes at the girl's heartfelt assessment. I care for him very deeply, she admitted. So what's stopping you from saying yes? Abby asked with typical directness. It was a fair question. What was holding her back? Not doubt about her feelings, nor concern about Abby's acceptance. Perhaps it was simply the magnitude of the decision, the irrevocable nature of marriage. I suppose I want to be absolutely certain, Lydia explained. Marriage is a lifetime commitment. Abby nodded sagely. Zach says the most important decisions are the ones you make with both your head and your heart. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. Just don't take too long deciding. He pretends to be patient, but he's actually terrible at waiting. With that parting wisdom, the girl headed back toward the house, leaving Lydia to her thoughts. Throughout the day, Lydia went about her usual tasks, but her mind kept returning to Zach's proposal and Abby's insights. By evening, a clarity had emerged from her confusion. When Zach returned from checking fence lines, she was waiting on the porch of the main house. "Evening," he greeted, his eyes searching her face for clues to her thoughts. "I'd like to speak with you," Lydia said softly. "If you have time." Zach nodded, removing his hat. "For you, always." They sat side by side on the porch steps, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. In the barn, a horse nickered softly. From the kitchen came the clatter of Abby washing dishes. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Lydia began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I figured as much," Zach replied, his voice carefully neutral despite the tension evident in his posture. Lydia took a deep breath, turning to face him directly. "When I came to Silver Creek, I was heartbroken over losing my uncle's ranch. I thought my dreams of independence and building something of my own were shattered." Zach listened intently, his expression serious. "Working here, with you and Abby, I've realized something important," Lydia continued. "A dream isn't just about property or possessions. It's about purpose, belonging, creating something meaningful." Hope began to dawn in Zach's eyes, but he remained silent, allowing her to finish. "What we've built here together over these months, the improvements to the ranch, Abby's growth, the home we've created, it matters more to me than owning my own piece of land." Lydia reached for his hand. "So yes, Zachary Holcomb, I will marry you. Because I love you, and because my dream has become our dream." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise after a long night. He pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. "I was prepared to persuade you, to promise you could still have your own piece of the ranch to manage however you wished." Lydia laughed softly. "I wouldn't say no to that, but it wasn't what decided me." He cupped her face gently. "May I kiss you? I've been wanting to for months." In answer, Lydia leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was tender at first, then deepening with months of unspoken longing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you," Zach whispered against her hair. From the doorway came a delighted squeal as Abby, who had clearly been eavesdropping, abandoned all pretense of giving them privacy. "Finally," she exclaimed, rushing to embrace them both. "I was beginning to think I'd have to arrange everything myself." Laughing, Zach pulled his sister into their circle. "You meddled quite enough as it was, young lady." Their wedding took place 6 weeks later in the Silver Creek Church, with Reverend Marshall officiating and what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Peterson wept openly, declaring she'd known from the first that Zach and Lydia were meant for each other. Sheriff Taylor gave the bride away, and Abby served as maid of honor, beaming with pride in her new blue dress. Lydia wore a simple cream gown that she and Abby had worked on together, with a wreath of dried autumn flowers in her hair. Zach, looking uncommonly formal in a new suit, appeared unable to take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and a sense of community that warmed Lydia's heart. This was what she had unknowingly been seeking when she journeyed west, not just land or independence, but connection, belonging, love. As twilight deepened into night, Zach led his bride away from the festivities toward their home, the main house, which they would now share as husband and wife. Abby would remain there too until she left for school in Denver, her former bedroom now converted to a sitting room where she could entertain friends when she returned for visits. The cabin where Lydia had lived would eventually become a guest house, though Zach had already suggested it might make a good office for her to manage the breeding program records he wanted to establish. "Happy?" Zach asked as they stood on the porch, the sounds of celebration continuing behind them. Lydia nodded, leaning into his embrace. "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her temple. "When I saw you sitting alone outside Jennings' store that evening, something told me our lives were about to change." "Is that why you approached me? Divine inspiration?" she teased. "Partly," he admitted with a grin. "Also because you were the prettiest woman I'd ever seen, even with tears on your cheeks." Lydia laughed, remembering her initial wariness. And I thought you were just being nosy. Neighborly, he corrected, drawing her closer. Just being neighborly. As the seasons changed and years passed, the Holcomb Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Zach's vision for selective cattle breeding proved successful, with ranchers from across the territory seeking his stock to improve their own herds. Lydia developed a talent for ranch management, her practical nature and quick intelligence complementing Zach's hands-on experience. Abby thrived at school in Denver, returning for holidays and summer breaks full of stories and new knowledge. She eventually became a teacher herself, starting a small school on the ranch for neighboring children before marrying a young doctor and moving to Denver permanently. 2 years after their wedding, Lydia gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after her uncle whose ranch had inadvertently brought her to Silver Creek. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 3 years later, completing their family. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Zach surprised Lydia with a special gift, the deed to her uncle's original property, which he had quietly purchased when the bank put it up for sale again. "It's yours," he told her as they stood on the land that had once been her dream. "To do with as you wish. Sell it, keep it as part of our holdings, or develop it separately." Tears filled Lydia's eyes as she looked over the property. It was good land, though smaller than their current ranch and in need of work after years of neglect. "What do you think we should do with it?" she asked, emphasizing the we to let him know she considered it their decision, not hers alone. Zach shrugged, his arm around her waist. "I was thinking it might make a good start for Thomas someday. Or Elizabeth, if she takes after her mother in determination and business sense." The suggestion that their children would continue what they had built, that their legacy would extend beyond their own lifetimes, filled Lydia with profound contentment. This was so much more than the independence she had originally sought. "I think that's perfect," she agreed, leaning against his shoulder as they gazed across the land that represented both her past dreams and their shared future. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, the work of the day complete. "Do you ever regret it?" Zach asked suddenly. "Giving up Boston for this life?" Lydia considered the question seriously, as she always did. "No," she answered truthfully. "I miss certain things at first: concerts, bookshops, the conveniences of city life. But what I've gained is immeasurably more valuable. Even on days when the well runs dry, the cattle break through fences, and everything seems to go wrong at once," he teased. "Even then," she confirmed, taking his hand. "Because at the end of those days, I still have you and the children, this home we've built together." Zach raised their joined hands to his lips. "I thank God every day for whatever providence led you to sit outside that store." Lydia smiled, remembering the young woman she had been, heartbroken, uncertain, alone. "And I thank God for the cowboy who thought I looked like I could use some company." As night deepened around them, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, Lydia Clarke Holcomb reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking land and independence, but had found something far more precious: a love that had transformed her dreams into a reality more beautiful than she could have imagined. In the vast landscape of the Colorado Territory, on a ranch built with determination and vision, she had discovered the true meaning of home: not a place, but the people with whom you choose to share your life. And sitting beside the man she loved, with their children sleeping safely nearby, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.